me fade this out, and we'll get started here. Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for being here. Let me, yeah. So let me get this. Hello, welcome. Thank you for being here for today's talk with Ishmael Reed. My name is Michael Cohen. I am the co-convener of a course with Professor Natasha Boas. That is LNS 25, Arts and Design at Berkeley, the California Countercultures. And so we're well past midway with this class, and I just want to thank everyone, particularly the students who are down here who have been assigned to read Mumbo Jumbo for this week, and for those of you who are members of the public who, many of you are now becoming friendly, familiar faces who have been coming to all of our Wednesday talks. So I want to thank you for supporting this event and coming out to, in particular for today. There's a necessary introduction here, which is to say that the purpose of the Arts and Design at Berkeley project is to introduce undergraduates in particular to the wide range of arts and design projects here at UC Berkeley. And those of us in the class had a really spectacular experience last night where we all got to see the Alvin Ailey American Dance Company perform a couple of new works, and then, of course, blew everyone out of the back of the theater by performing Revelations, as they do. And I don't think that we could have a more perfect sort of lead-in to reading Mumbo Jumbo and listening to Ishmael Reed than having experienced a night of African-American culture and dance last night. For those of you who are in the public, right, Alvin Ailey is at Zellerbach all week. Get your tickets now. Cal Performances, sponsors, etc. But they're great. How do you pass up an opportunity to see Alvin Ailey having performed here for more than 50 years at Zellerbach Hall? In addition to Cal Performances, the Arts and Design at Berkeley is sponsored by the Mellon Foundation, Lisa and Douglas Goldman, and others that make all of this possible. Now, let me quickly, because we have been trying to do this in a steadfast and consistent way, the Berkeley Time musical selections. I need my cursor here, sorry. Where is it over here? Here it is. The Berkeley Time musical selections for today began with Volunteered Slavery by Rashawn Roland Kirk, who I don't know if Ishmael Reed likes Roland Kirk, and I'm going to assume he does, but he reminds me of Ishmael because this is a guy who figured out how to play like 3 saxophones at the same time. And play them well, and that really reminds me of this sort of incredible ability of Ishmael Reed to write in every conceivable genre simultaneously at a peak level. And so we start with Voluntary Slavery by Rashawn Roland Kirk. We get Stand by Sly and the Family Stone. And then I played a selection called Jez Grew by Conjure, which is actually a band that he's a part of, wrote the lyrics for, has been playing with, because literature is not enough. He has to be a world-class musician and songwriter as well. Now, the perils of introducing Ishmael Reed are considerable in that you run the risk in listing his many accomplishments and influences of generating an introduction that is longer than the talk itself. Born in Chattanooga, Tennessee, but raised and educated in Buffalo, New York. Right, there's our Buffalo. Buffalo is in the house. We brought him just for that purpose. Ishmael moved to New York City in 1962, where he began what is now a 5, working on 6 or more a decade career as a writer, novelist, poet, musician, anthologist, playwright, essayist, publisher, and organizer of all things art and politics. He had a very good year as a young writer in 1973, in which he was nominated for not 1 but 2 National Book Awards, one for the novel Mumbo Jumbo, and the other in poetry for his work Conjure. Here I have images that go along with this. I give you these. This is my sort of selected covers. Starting in 1967 with the Freelance Pallbearers. Yellowback Radio broke down Mumbo Jumbo in 1972, which is my personal favorite, which is why I made all of them read it. The other favorite is Flight to Canada. And that's the fiction. There's poetry down below, anthologies, nonfiction, and the like. This man does not respect literary boundaries. He is famously collaborative and combative in just about every field, and in the sense that he has embraced the mantra that writin' is fightin', and that this not only extends to the sort of politics of prose and poetry, but also that he's one of this country's most cherished writers on boxing as well, including his new book, which he has for sale here, on the complete Muhammad Ali, which is down there at the end, his most recent work. Amongst his innovations include, but are not limited to, inventing the term and the entire genre of what we now know of as the neo-slave narrative in Flight to Canada, which has been reproduced or advanced by no less than Toni Morrison, Colson Whitehead, Octavia Butler, and others. He is also perhaps, probably, the first person to use the now ubiquitous term multiculturalism. One that has resonated through this university and around the world for decades. One of the earliest uses of that term in the late 1970s, 1978 in particular. He's also the founder of the Before Columbus Foundation in 1976, which began giving out in 1980. The American Book Award was designed as a challenge the lack of diversity to be found in Pulitzer Prizes and American and National Book Awards. And the long list of people that we all need to read that have received this prize include people like Barbara Christian, Tony K. Bambara, Frank Chin, Jack Hirschman, Sandra Cisneros, Edward Said and Joe Sacco, Sherry Moraga and Gloria Anzaldúa, Gerald Visner, Audre Lorde, Bell Hooks, Mary Crow Dog, and Berkeley's own graduate Jeff Chang have been recipients of this prize. And I think that this is one of the things that marks Ishmael's career in a very powerful way, which is his enormous generosity to young writers and his willingness to anthologize high school students who've written one poem alongside Langston Hughes and others, and putting them together and encouraging people to write and elevating and expanding the range of their voice. And I think that this it takes multiple modes and is something for which I think the history of multicultural, multiracial, and particularly African American literature will forever be in his debt for. Since 1970, Ishmael Reed has been based here on the West Coast, living in Oakland and spending 35 years teaching at the University of California at Berkeley. He retired from teaching in 2005, but we are most pleased to welcome Ishmael Reed back to his home here at UC Berkeley. So please welcome. I'm going to turn this off. We'll just go for a blank screen. Certainly.
Well, that was the most accurate introduction I've gotten in years. Yeah, most people go to something called Ismail by Spring. They misspelled my name, that should be a clue that it's not accurate. I want to thank Natasha, my former student, and Michael for inviting me here. And Natasha told me that the class is working on the Black Arts Movement, and they're reading my book. So I thought I would start out with, or by reading a op-ed that's going to be published in the New York Times. I began contributing to the New York Times in 1976, actually, or maybe even earlier. And so that's what happens when you get up at 5 o'clock in the morning. You can really vent. This morning I wrote something for the Irish Times, and I've been published in the Baltimore Sun, the Washington Post, Los Angeles Times, all these different op-eds. And most recently I've been a contributor to Haaretz, the newspaper in Israel. If you go to Haaretz, you'll see my last two op-eds dealing with the American election. So this is something called, I want to introduce my daughter, Tennessee, who is a Berkeley alumni and a Mills alumni, and has about 6 or 7 published books and has read her work all over the world, most recently in Venice. And Carla Blank, who's my partner for 50 years, has collaborated, choreographer, dancer, author. Her most recent book is Storming The Old Boys Citadel, about two women architects who worked in the 1900s, turn of the last century, which is really amazing because that's still an issue. It's still an old boys network. So she talks about two architects, one in our hometown, Buffalo, New York, Louise Bethune, who built the Lafayette Hotel, which is one of the seven luxury hotels of that time. She's collaborated with Robert Wilson recently, directed my play in China 2 years ago. It was censored here. I had to go to a totalitarian state to get my so really, and has, as I said, collaborated with Robert Wilson and directed a play for the State Department in Ramallah a few years ago. Okay, is that Z Space? In Z Space, Carl is directing an event or a multimedia piece called News from Fukushima about the Fukushima disaster, the nuclear disaster there. And it's written by Yuri Kageyama, who was a former student of mine at Berkeley, who's now working for the Associated Press. Okay, so the title of the essay is Meanwhile, What Have Black Nationalists Been Up to? White nationalism is all the rage. No pun, right? With extensive media coverage, Nazi salutes taking place under near chandeliers, a long way from the dingy Munich beer halls, and even a cartoon frog logo. It is indeed springtime for Hitler, which has alarmed the German government, whose own 30s and 40s version of white nationalism was reduced to rebels. So Germany has now become the moral conscience of the West. I was 17 when I toured Germany in 1955. The tour guide pointed to a pile of bricks that he said was all that remained of an opera house. He said sadly that it would never be restored to its former glory. The nationalism that we studied in schools was European. It dealt with how different provinces in Germany and Italy united under one flag. Although recently there's a book called A Great Conspiracy that says that the Italians didn't realize they were Italians until they came to New York. They referred to other people as Americans. It was in New York that I learned about black nationalism, a tradition that dates back to the 1700s. Some of its proponents argue for a separate state, probably get South Carolina. Thousands wanted to return to Africa, a sentiment that was stirred by the black nationalist hero, Marcus Garvey, a Jamaican immigrant and self-help advocate who was deported to Jamaica in 1927 after serving jail time for mail fraud. Some say unfairly. The Buffalo Evening News, as a matter of fact, of the time said that he had been framed. He was bitterly opposed by integrationists and Harvard men, W.B. Du Bois and the gutsy Monroe Trotter, who was once late for an appointment with Calvin Coolidge. He says, well, he's held up civil rights, so I'm going to be late for him. Black nationalism would like for President Obama to pardon Garvey and Jack Johnson, the boxer. Inspired by Malcolm X and the Nation of Islam, black nationalism experienced a revival in the 1960s as a result of innovations in print technology. Can you all hear me? Okay. Which led to the distribution of chapbooks that reached large audiences in television, specifically a show called Soul, where black nationalist poets read their work to even larger audiences. And that included Hakeem Adabudi, Nikki Giovanni, and others. They brought poetry from parlor into the streets and inspired a younger generation of artists like Tupac Shakur, and I might mention the last poet. In comparison to white nationalists, whose reading list, judging from a catalog issued by the National Vanguard, which is a neo-Nazi site, is limited to white authors with a heavy emphasis on Northern European mythology, the one used by black nationalists of the 1960s was broad. I took another look at this National Vanguard bibliography, and I was wrong. It includes one a non-white author. That's B.S. Naipaul. And even though it emphasizes Northern European mythology, a number of the people, as you've noticed, in the white nationalist movement were born below Naples and below the south of France, which the Klan says is like makes you black. I don't know. These things are confusing. The black nationalists were familiar with the works of Virginia Woolf and Robert Creeley, as well as Frantz Fanon, John Henry Clark, Harold Crews, and the underrated playwright, the late Aisha Rahman. One of the handbooks of the 1960s New York black nationalists was about African art called Mantu. It was written by Janhas Jan, who, unlike Richard Spencer, an alt-writer who believes in non-violent ethnic cleansing, was a tall, blue-eyed, blonde German. You don't get it? Okay, look at some of those Nazi posters. The ideal was blonde, blue-eyed Aryans. And a genome investigation recently conducted by Indian scientists discovered there's no such thing as an Aryan invasion of India. It's a big myth, what you call like false news. Black nationalist eclecticism didn't end there. Though stereotyped as a hater in the mass media, Minister Louis Farrakhan of the Nation of Islam admires the music of Yasha Heifetz. The minister can be seen on YouTube performing Felix Mendelssohn's Violin Concerto, Opus 64, with the Oakland Symphony. Now, how many of those who want to preserve what they refer to as Western civilization can do that? And why, with all this zealotry about saving the West, are symphony orchestras going broke? Some of those who back the alt-right movement are billionaires. Why aren't they showing symphony orchestras the money? One of the most famous of black nationalists was Amiri Baraka, who broke with the movement in the mid-70s and became a communist. He accused black nationalism of entrepreneurialism, where selling products like Afro Sheen, a hairspray that's carried by Walmart, became more important than the liberation of black Americans. Though later he accused the party of holding negative attitudes toward small black businesses. Quote, he said, "But the black bourgeoisie should be encouraged to expand, and in that expansion to give jobs to black people and create institutions the big white bourgeois will not create," he wrote. An example of the entrepreneurial direction of the black arts movement are the current negotiations between Oakland developers and artists assembled by black arts veteran, poet, and publisher Marvin X to create the Black Arts Movement Business District in downtown Oakland that would include affordable housing, a jobs training center, and small businesses. Whether the commercialization of Kwanzaa, a harvest celebration created by Dr. Maulana Karenga, can be called small is open to question. Picked up by the big department stores, Kwanzaa greeting cards and other products earned an estimated $500 million in profits in 2014, which is double the amount since the last time I checked. In addition, Kwanzaa fairs where vendors sell merchandise are held throughout the country. By contrast, I don't think there's a big demand for white nationalist products. Department stores already sell white sheets. You can get them, you can buy them at Bloomingdale's. You know. While white nationalist movements include those who bear a racial animus toward blacks, without checking with 23andMe.com or Ancestry.com about whether they have black ancestors, more evidence that the hate whitey phase of black nationalism has passed in the mid-70s was the presence of white scholars at the recent conference that took place at Dillard University, convened to celebrate the 50th anniversary of the Black Arts Movement. The movement drew thousands of blacks to literature that had been ignored by their formal education. It was when blacks, Native Americans, Hispanic, and Asian Americans, many of whom were inspired by black arts, began to explore their histories and traditions and abandon the requirement that they blend in with something called the Anglo-mainstream, that the cries of political correctness and identity politics arose. I find it ironic that Steve Bannon, who was actually the real president, Irish American, believes that in his Vatican speech, believes that the highest pinnacle of the West's achievement was the Victorian period, which occurred during the Irish famine, which was, which was manipulated by the British. And both he and President Trump, whose mother was Scottish, have a bust of Churchill in the Oval Office, which is like Barack Obama having the bust of Jefferson Davis in the Oval Office. One of those who attended the Dilliard Conference was Chinese-American poet Jenny Lim, current poet laureate of SF Jazz. Lim is among the multicultural poets who have said that they were influenced by the Black Arts Movement. Some of those who were pioneers of the Black Arts Movement were honored during the Dilliard Conference, which is organized by Kim McMillan, a lecturer at Merced College, even though she was recovering from major surgery. Among them were critic Jerry Ward, award-winning poet Mona Lisa Saloy, Haki Madhubuti, founder of the Third World Press, which is celebrating its 50th anniversary this year, John C. O'Neill, one of the founders of Free Southern Theater, and co-founder with Amiri Baraka of Harlem's Black Arts Repertory Theater, American Book Award winner Askia Torre, and New Orleans poet Kaluma Yasalam. The name of New Orleans icon, the late Tom Dent, who was the host of the famed Umbro writing workshops of the 1960s, was invoked frequently during the conference. The late Amiri Baraka traces the New York version of the Black Arts Movement to Umbro. Now, I had to straighten out some distorted history in the Times, pointing to the fact that the famous St. Mark's Poetry Project would not have begun had not a thug punched Tom Dent. We used to go read at this coffee shop, which had the pretentious name of Le Metros or something like that, a Frenchified name. And one night, I think the owner, who's a right-winger, had a Goldwater poster in his window. And that Goldwater looks pretty good now, actually. And was upset about black poets attending the poetry reading, so he had hired some thugs to patrol the place. One of them punched Tom Dent. I went to his rescue. We left the place. Then I turned back, and Walter Lowenfels, the great communist poet, was reading it at night, and I told him that he shouldn't continue reading. Well, that closed down that place, and we went to St. Mark's. Paul Blackburn, the late Paul Blackburn, who was a Black Mountain poet, and I looked around for another place, and we found St. Mark's, and so St. Mark's was begun. So that was undergoing a sort of like whitening or white lashing or whatever, so that the black influence on what happened there was erased. There were poetry readings at the Dilliard Conference and panels and performances, including one by the costume Wild Chapachulas, these Mardi Gras Indians, who object to the term Mardi Gras Indians. This is the third conference over the last 3 years that has had black arts as a theme. Maybe this is why a highly publicized critic who has dismissed the black arts as short-lived for decades put up thousands of dollars to co-sponsor the Dilliard Conference. The colonial, I just wrote a novel about British occupation of India, and even tried to learn Hindi, for months. I struggled at it. It's called Conjugating Hindi. And in that, I talk about, the British occupation. And the British perfected the art of divide and conquer. So you'd always have a native who would, that happened in the United States too, who would tell the colonial office what, in the words of Adolph Reed Jr., what those drums mean. So in the United States, it's Henry Louis Gates Jr., who tells the colonial office what's up. And for years, he's been dismissing the black arts movement, but now he's funding it, so that means there must be some money in black arts. I mean, I'm just talking plain here. I'm among friends. White nationalists maintain that they are defending something they refer to as Judeo-Christian civilization, which I wonder what Aristotle and Socrates would say about that. They were pagans, right? Which is kind of high-class bumper sticker and has little to do with Europe that I've visited many times and the Europe that I've studied. Among the intellectuals and scholars whom I have encountered in Reykjavik in the north and Granada in the south, Paris and London in the west to Venice in the east, I doubt there's a consensus among them about what this term means. Steve Bannon might have better genes than mine. He says, this is the same thing. He's Irish American. That's what they say. That's what they used to say about Irish Americans. They have bad genes. And if you go to some old Harper's Weekly, you can look at that. Your students can look at that. You'll find Irish Americans depicted as apes with simian features. As a matter of fact, when the great apes were brought from Africa to the London zoos, the British, who saw the Irish as a separate race, would say, now we know the missing link between, that the Irish are the missing link between apes and men. So, I mean, you know, people who are stereotyped in Europe come here and they go Anglo on us. Matter of fact, Ronald Reagan said he was an Anglo-American. And I think that's sort of like self-loathing or self-hatred, isn't that? Because the Irish have a very noble and glorious history. And I think without Irish-American examples like the Irish theater, the Celtic revival, black writers and playwrights and writers would be impoverished because a number of them refer to the Irish examples, you know, in their models, use Irish models in their works. So Steve Bannon might have better genes than mine, and he said that blacks are genetically inferior. But even I can identify the Muslim scholar who influenced St. Thomas Aquinas, right? Without your Muslim scholars, you wouldn't have your so-called Western civilization. There are Muslim scholars who even influenced, who rescued the books of the so-called pagans, Aristotle and the rest, and who also influenced St. Thomas Aquinas, who's considered the principal philosopher of the Catholic Church. I just want to say that. I was at the Vatican. I was amazed how much pagan stuff they got there. I mean, they took everything out of Egypt. So when there's money involved. An apartheid view of the world does not define Europe, where civilizations crisscross and are mixed up. When I visited Hungary in 2002, I was told by writers that Hungarians came to Europe from Asia. While white nationalists are scrawling ugly writings in public and in private homes and committing hate crimes, black and brown nationalists are decorating their cities' walls with murals. While white nationalists are torching churches, a black nationalist might be studying Buddhism. While white nationalists might be listening to the hate-filled lyrics of Hank Williams Jr., black nationalists prefer Pharoah Sanders, Randy Weston, Ahmed Jamal, Sun Ra, Archie Shepp, Big Carroll, Abby Lincoln, David Murray, and others. A movement built on hate usually ends up like that German opera house. The only traces of it having once existed, a pile of bricks. That's my op-ed. This book just came in yesterday. It's the Spanish edition of Mumbo Jumbo. Thank you. And all of my novels are in print, including Freelance Pallbearers, the first one, which is making a comeback because of the present political situation. And it was hailed by PBS as one of among about 10 books you ought to read to understand the Trump administration. It's about a guy about a ruler who rules the country from the toilet. I thought it was the most experimental novel ever written since I was living in New York, you know. Okay, so they asked me to write a new introduction, and so I wrote Mumbo Jumbo 45 years later. I approached the writing of Mumbo Jumbo with a youthful excitement, having discovered during my research that African religion had survived the slave trade and had millions of followers in the hemisphere, something that had been missing in my colonial education. Although there had been whispers of a religion that didn't sound like Christianity among members of my family and their friends, I expressed no interest. I hadn't read Zora Neale Hurston or Katherine Dunham, who had found a similarity between African possession rights, during which the host is inhabited by a god, of which there are hundreds, and those who seem to be seized by the spirits that I witnessed among black Christians in churches in Buffalo, New York. Katherine Dunham, the choreographer and dancer, lived in Haiti and recognized the similarities between African religion and you might call neo-African religion in Haiti, which people in Hollywood call voodoo. The dolls, I say, those dolls, those so-called voodoo, they're brought by the Irish to New Orleans. Okay, you know, so don't ask me. I know it's complex this country is. Katherine Dunham had witnessed this. And I'm teaching a Baldwin seminar at the California College of the Arts right now. And I tried to explain to my students why the members of Baldwin's Holiness Church that he writes about in Go Tell on the Mountain, the women wear white, and there's dancing and drumming and possession are permitted, okay? And what that is a carryover from the African rites. So if you know about West African religion, it's monotheistic. There you go. The popular journalism still dismisses African religion as animism. Quote marks. I don't know what that means. And so it's has one God, Olodumare. I studied Yoruba and helped. My teacher helped me translate something called Igbo Olodumare, the Forest of God, which is the West African, the Nigerian Odyssey. And so his daughters are Oshun and Oya and others. And Oshun rises in this hemisphere because of the safe Atlantic crossing, or those who survived the Atlantic crossing. She has something to do with the water. So on December 31st in Rio, they celebrate, and this is whites, blacks, Indians, they all celebrate Iemanjá, who's her manifestation in Brazil. They go to the beach and they light candles, and she is the sort of like goddess in small g of the waters. So that's why the women in the Baldwin's Holiness Church wear white. It's a remnant from that Oshun reverence for Oshun. African religion was dismissed as voodoo, a Hollywood term, and confused with Western witchcraft in movies like I Walk with a Zombie, The Serpent and Rainbow, Skeleton Key, The Voodoo Dawn, and others. Ignorant public figures who saw themselves as members of Western civilization about which they were ignorant used voodoo in a pejorative manner with terms like voodoo economics. Of course, Spanish scholars know that without Muslim scholars, Western civilization wouldn't exist. That's a repeat there. There's something that CNN is running. CNN is like the main purveyor of stereotypes against black people in the world, the main one. And so they have something running called The Believers, a series about religion. It's God help us. And this Sunday they're doing what they call voodoo. And one of the announcers says dramatically, does voodoo have something to do with devil worship? Well, you know, there's no devil in African religion. There's a figure called Eshu, who does the same thing that Jesus does. Matter of fact, my Yoruba teacher says that the reason that Africans were vulnerable to be or susceptible to being converted to Christianity is because Eshu and Jesus have the same phonemes. Okay, so Eshu and Jesus are both crossroads figures. The crossroads figures. Jesus says, I am the way to the invisibles. And Eshu says the same thing. You have to consult Eshu before you meet the other invisibles. And there are hundreds of them. Let's see. I began my research with a tourist book called Voodoo in New Orleans by Roger Tallant. But the more I studied voodoo, I found that Haitian immigrants to Louisiana had brought a religion that was more complex than that witnessed by sightseers or depicted by Hollywood. They were able to maintain African religion because, and the Oshun ceremonies are observed in Atlanta, Georgia, in August, and in Western Africa and in Brazil. They were able to maintain African religion because they had rid their island of colonial influences and even found a place in their pantheons for images from Europe and the mythologies of the indigenous people who had been exterminated by the invaders. As a matter of fact, by coincidence, for my new novel, I ran across a white Loa. A Loa is like sort of like an entity that possesses people in the ceremony, and they rise every day. There's always room for new ones. And I found there are two white Loas that I've discovered. One is called Erzuli's sister. Erzuli is like the Haitian Virgin Mary, and Bridget, who is of Irish origin, is another one. So I use Bridget, who's married to the Lord of the Cemetery, Baron Samedi, in my new book, Conjugating Hindi. So there are Native Americans. There are the African religion is a perfect image or symbol for multiculturalism because it can absorb even icons from Islam. When the Muslims were crushed in Brazil, the African religious pantheon made way for an entity called Obatala, which some people are saying is Allah. Okay, I want to spend the whole time on this. Let's see, I say when some icons of Islam were crushed during an uprising in Brazil, the Muslims always fought back. I think we are acquainted with one slave revolt, Amistad, that terrible movie, the awful movie, where these black Africans stand by while the whites, it's like that, discuss their fate, like what you get on these panels, all day on MSNBC, blacks sort of like are discussed, and it's like the Lincoln movie, where the blacks up in the balcony having nothing to do with the outcome of their fate, and it's like they go back and forth like watching tennis, as the whites exchange. Some of the whites are slave traders. So they were able to accommodate a number of people from different religions. Let me give an example of how people, not only blacks, but members of other indigenous religions, use Catholic saints. There's something called Santeria, which is so popular in New York that even stockbrokers use Santeria. And it's a combination of Catholicism and West African religion, because the Catholics were much more cosmopolitan than the Protestants when accepting other faiths, depending upon the Pope, of course. And so Santeria is a combination of two. And so that shows you how African religion blends with other faiths. And the same thing happens with, say, Mexicans who behind the saints you find an indigenous god or goddess. Okay. Let me give you an example. St. Patrick. St. Patrick is associated with snakes. And so when worshipers revere St. Patrick, they know that Damballa, an African entity who is a python, is behind St. Patrick. So you have like a cover for their beliefs. Much of which survives in the Americas is based upon the belief systems of Yoruba people of West Africa was discovered. Mingled with Catholicism, Yoruba has found followers among millions from working class people in Brazil, Puerto Rico, and Cuba to stockbrokers in New York. To make the point about African religion and mumbo jumbo, I use the popular whodunit genre, a history mystery. The time is a jazz age, and the Harlem Renaissance, an age when the country was seized by Dionysian frenzy before the 1929 collapse of the economy. Dionysian, because in the book I draw a parallel between Greek religion and African religion. So I'm one of these people who regard the Odyssey as a book that ranks with the Quran and the Bible. It's Greek religion. Also, I'm one of the long list of Western artists who have been influenced by Egyptian mythology and art. Among them, dancer Isadora Duncan, visual artist Alberto Giacometti, musician Sun Ra, Africa Bambaataa, Michael Jackson. At the time of writing a mumbo jumbo, my colleagues and I were posing Egypt as a black civilization. And so the key to solving the mystery of mumbo jumbo lies in Egyptian mythology, a subject of investigation by Papa Labai, which is a name I got from New Orleans, a tradition bearer. But when I actually went to Egypt, I found the people who resemble me on the pyramid walls were beheaded. So, well, it's true, you know. Mumbo jumbo, though dealing with a weighty subject, also uses comic aggression. One of the source books for the novel was the Putnam Medieval Reader, which describes the dance epidemics of the medieval period, and music and dance are at the center of the novel. At the time, I was living with the famed postmodernist dancer, another plug, Carla Blank, who's been my partner for 50 years. Mumbo Jumbo was published at a time when publishers tolerated books that lacked a wide audience. This book would not be published today by New York publishers. This book would not be published today. In the 1960s and early 70s, you still had publishers who had class, who were like the French, who would publish a book regardless of the size of its audience or consumers, okay? So this book would, as a matter of fact, I don't know if you know Elizabeth Nunez? You know the works by the Trinidadian American novelist Elizabeth Nunez? Well, you ought to read her. She had a excellent interview in Poets and Writers recently. One of her books is Under the Limbo Silence. Under the Limbo Silence. I recommend it to you. She's a distinguished professor at the City University of New York. She said that what publishers demand from black writers now is what you call girlfriend books. She said it, girlfriend books. So if you look at something like Star, that thing that they have on TV now, or these like soap opera things that they have, that's sort of like what is being required. So what happens to the great tradition of Gwendolyn Brooks, or Margaret Walker, you know, or Langston Hughes, you know, or any number, or Melvin Tolson, you know, all these, or 19th century writers, black writers, who risk their lives attacking institutions and individuals. For example, one of the poets attacked Andrew Johnson and called him all. You could get killed. As a matter of fact, David Walker, who wrote The Appeal, and which Southerners tried to ban, might have been murdered. Richard Wright might have been murdered. So now the African American literary tradition in the marketplace has been reduced to girlfriend books. What they call chick lit. And one of the big advocates of girlfriend books is the current book reviewer, or head of the book reviews of both Daily and Sunday, Pamela Paul. We have a back and forth exchange about her taste. Okay. Mumbo Jumbo was published at a time when published a tolerated book that lacked a wide audience. My editor was the great Anne Freegood. I had control of the book to the extent that I even designed a cover, which was a photo of Josephine Baker, whom I met here at the Rainbow Sign. There used to be a club in Berkeley called the Rainbow Sign. I met her there. She asked me, did I know the person who wrote the novel? I said, yeah, I know him. And tell her it was me. I was in awe of her. I had control of the book to the extent that I even designed a cover. Having been influenced by a visual artist, collages, I included graphics which serve as a kind of counterpoint to the main narrative. The New York Times has called it a pioneer graphic novel. And now I'm being published by Dalkey Archives, which also gives me the complete control of my work, and I'm published in Canada. I'm sort of like a writer in exile. My last 3 books or so have been published in Montreal, and not in the United States. I wrote a novel on the O.J. Simpson case called Juice, which used O.J. Simpson case as background. We make a whole lot of money, but except for me and O.J., people made millions. One of these guys got an Oscar. He came to my house and interviewed me, and they left out my interview. Because I said that 3 of the principal forensics experts in this country, Michael Baden, Cyril West, and Henry Lee, still have questions about that case. And you can't say they were playing a race card. I mean, fake news. And I illustrated the novel because I'm reading Baldwin's novels, and at that time, novelists were influenced by Freud and Marx. I think the feminists got rid of Freud. That's one great thing they did. And Marx. And so in the novel, you get all this heavy-handed psychoanalysis. I was thinking, you're smothering this character, analyzing him. And Baldwin and others were, as a matter of fact, Baldwin had a play done at the Actors Studio where they do the Stanislavski method, right? And so, Baldwin's asking for the motives of the characters and just smothering them with the psychoanalysis. And there's a party scene where one guest says, I'll give you a treat here. Why don't you visit my analyst? So all that stuff was happening. So my characters are not treated in that manner. So modernist critics have called me a cartoonist. And so I studied cartooning. And a publisher was going to publish it, but he said my cartoons weren't good enough. So I went to cartoon school at the age of 70. And my cartoon's been published in San Francisco Chronicle and a whole bunch of places now. So the novel Juice is about a cartoonist, and I have my cartoons in there. Okay. This novel has given rise to side industries. There's a white group called Jess Grew. There's an orchestra called Jess Grew. The idea of Jess Grew was inspired by James Weldon Johnson's remark that nobody knew the origin of some songs, they just grew. And Zora Neale Hurston's description of how new lows or spirits rise, which he attributes to an X factor. Sort of like how the Virgin Mary ascended. According to Carl Jung, these Italian peasants just kept having visions of the Virgin Mary, and all of a sudden, if you go to the Vatican, you see that she has probably more, she's depicted more than Jesus, her son. That's a strong tiger mother, man. Let's see. The book has drawn fans from all American classes of entertainment. Prominent, as a matter of fact, Georgia, what's his name? David, what's that guy in the X-Files name? David Duchovny. He said he wanted to do a dissertation at Yale on Mumbo Jumbo. And George Clinton, Parliament Funkadelic, wanted to make a film. And some people get carried away. There's a individual named Maria Van Dalen who read the novel, went to Haiti and became a priestess, and now has a following in the Netherlands. At least 2 individuals suffered nervous breakdowns after reading the novel. And that was not my intention. I think you can have fun. You can have fun with this novel. Matter of fact, I landed in the airport and his mother said, "Hey, you have to go to the asylum to see my son. He read your novel," and freaked out. The late Andrew Hope, a traditional headman of the Tlingit, Native American Alaska, used the novel's theme of returning art that was looted by Western museums to make demands that Tlingit art be returned. Finally, if scholars continue to see Mumbo Jumbo as an antecedent to E.L. Doctorow's Ragtime, it's because Doctorow was in the audience when I read an excerpt from Mumbo Jumbo at Sarah Lawrence College. At the time, I called it my Ragtime novel. Okay, how much time do we have?
Another 15 minutes.
Okay, I want to read some poems, if you would like. Okay, this is from a new collection called Eavesdropping on the Gods. And this came from my experience, when were we living in Nietzsche's house, 2015? I lived in Nietzsche's house in the Swiss Alps and really got, he's sort of like this wild philosopher that you like when you're 18. He's saying all kind of wild things. And I discovered the guy was really a mama's boy, like really a weakling. and he's thinking, he's thinking about these Supermen, the Aryans is BS. Hitler is like this stumpy-looking creature, with, you know, who wouldn't take his shirt off like Putnam. You couldn't see Hitler taking his shirt off. Just thought he was descended from some big blonde beast in India or whatever. So I just looked at, and the guy, I say he had gastrointestinal problems. He farted a lot, Nietzsche. So I tried to humanize him. It's like that. I don't know if maybe there's some of the old timers can remember the Joe Atlas. The guy who gets sand swept on him or something at the beach, and then he becomes a Superman. But anyway, so I call the collection "Eavesdropping on the Gods." This whole collection, and my most recent poem is called "Luca and Pluto Walk into a Bar." Pluto overhears Luca say, "Why aren't I given credit for all life that exists? Is it because I'm a single-cell bacterium-like organism? I am the ancestor of trees, birds, and just about everything you could think of. Instead of looking up to the sky for God, they should have looked to the bottom of the ocean where I live." "Oh, you think that you don't get respect," Pluto said. "First they give me that dreadful name after the Greek Hades, and then they dismiss me as just a big snowball in space. And now that they find that I'm more complicated, that underneath my surface lie oceans and possible life, I'm booted from the news cycle by the discovery of a ninth planet." Turning to the bartender, a pigeon, Pluto said, "At least we're not a pigeon." Luca agreed and shook hands with Pluto. Wiping glasses, the pigeon responded, "Well, Pluto, it must be boring to be on the same path for millions of years. And Luca, you have to have one of Jacques Cousteau Jr.'s submersibles to even notice you. Aren't you lonely?" And then the pigeon poured 2 drinks and said, "I can fly." This is one of my political poems. Paul Ryan is another Irish American who's lost his way. Poor guy. We have trouble with people who don't know where they came from. There was an Irish guy who had to come all the way over here to New York to do St. Patty's Day, and it took him to round up Muslims, blacks, and all these for a rally in New York. And he said that the Irish Americans around Trump are Irish Americans without a heart. Gil Scott-Heron, you spoke of winter in America, but the winter in America is not as cold as the winter in Paul Ryan's soul. Paul Ryan is so cold that penguins honored him with an ice statue. Paul Ryan is so cold that when his colleagues have a meeting with him, they bring space heaters. Paul Ryan is so cold that when he breathes on somebody, they get frostbitten. Paul Ryan is so cold that his nickname in high school was 30 degrees F, or simply 32. Paul Ryan is so cold that Jack Frost sued him for identity theft. Paul Ryan told a dying man, "No more medicine for you. We need that bed for a VIP. Your bill is overdue. Insurance companies pay my way? What is that to you? All of my colleagues are up for sale, owned by the guys who are too big to jail. When I go out to dine on crab, the Copes and Big Farmer pick up the tab." Paul Ryan drinks a wine called Ecchu Glancree, $350 a bottle to order to you, a long way from Janesville, population 62,640. When he cuts a safety net, you'll fall in love with pigeon stew. You'll be scouring garbage cans for food of any description. You'll become shoplifters at drugstores to fill your prescriptions. All you marks who voted for Trump, you'll be subprimed and thrown out on your fat, spoiled, hateful rumps. "I'm taking away your Social Security," he told the seniors who get the news from Fox. "You better hold on to your puny savings to pay for that final box. God forbid your kids get sick with chicken pox. you better have some money to spare because Paul Ryan got rid of Obamacare. He's going to privatize your Medicare. He's going to privatize your cat. If you don't watch out, he might even privatize your mama. Now, what do you think of that? Now, do you miss Barack Obama? Paul Ryan is a cold, cold dude. He has an ice box for a heart. He does his abs in the Capitol gym to trim away his flab, but he hogs all he can from big oil and gas. The 1% own his skinny ass. He's so inhuman, he's never used the loo. He doesn't have ice in his veins. He's lacking in veins and in blood cells too. Ice-T won't get anywhere near Paul Ryan, nor will Ice Cube. And when the Republican Party melts down all the ice, the only glaciers remaining will be found in Paul Ryan's eyes. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Thank you for dropping knowledge as normal. I have a question about something that you have been on record as saying that the internet is one of the probably the greatest invention of your lifetime. And I was thinking about reading Juice, especially alongside Mumbo Jumbo. In Juice, it really addresses this time where the media, it's like about what you were just talking about, media networks and Hollywood, really like corroborating a narrative at a time where, interestingly, like we don't quite have YouTube. Mm-hmm. So you have these characters and all this knowledge that seems to come from like, the parts of C-SPAN that don't get recorded and captured forever. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to know just in general, why did you choose to have characters emailing each other, and what was the relationship of the internet for you as you were writing this O.J. Simpson novel?
Yeah, well, the technology accelerated past me because I began the novel in 1994. And my remark about the internet, as a novelist, as a writer, I don't have to trudge in the library anymore. So much information is available that I can work on 3 or 4 or 5 things at a time. For example, I have a play opening in New York in June called The Private Lives of the Alt-Right. And I was able to download Bannon's biography, his speeches, and all this stuff. That's part of the novel. So the internet has really set me free, and the computers. I used to use a typewriter, and papers pile up. I'd lose my way. But now with files, you can put all kind of different, poetry, nonfiction, different files. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
And I think the media represents a real threat. I'm not saying it's the enemy of the people, but it certainly is the enemy of blacks, Muslims, Hispanics, and other people, I believe. And I think, for example, in the 90s, there was a convention of journalists, black, Hispanic, and Asian American, and they regarded the media as the enemy. I've been recommending that this newseum in Washington that the journalists have built for journalism, they have a hall of shame with the front pages of all the sensational newspapers that promoted lynchings, riots, wars. It's quite a list. So the way that I think that the president has such a dire view of black Americans because he doesn't read our books. He watches TV. If you look at blacks on television, you think it was the end of the world. We've lived in inner city for 30 years, and it's more complex than that which you get in the media.
Any other questions?
Thank you very much for your talk. I'm wondering, it sounded like you're very critical of the alt right, of Trump, etc. But you also seem to have a certain amount of empathy, whether it's facetious or not. Like the element of, like, poor Paul Ryan, like, these people that have lost their way and how much trouble they cause us. And I'm hearing kind of echoes of James Baldwin in that.
Wait, no, really?
I am.
Well,
Well, I wanted to ask though.
I wrote a piece about James Baldwin. I think the difference between his generation and mine was that I think James Baldwin's a very ambitious writer. Chester Himes said so. And sometimes he made up things. Like he said that he and Martin Luther King were the closest of friends. An FBI tape shows that King regarded him as an interloper. And those guys were homophobic. I mean, a lot of us, we grew up being homophobes. So they had these attitudes toward James Baldwin. They wouldn't permit him to participate in the March on Washington. He also said he was tight with Richard Wright, and Chester Himes denies that. So his book, Go Tell the Mountain, is a terrific book, a great book. And in terms of characterizations, he's a master. He has a photographer's eye for scenes and characters. And I think that's because one of his mentors was Buford Delaney, who's a painter. So if you go Google Buford Delaney, you'll see where, and there are a lot of images about eyes and witness and eyes. So he's splendid in those. But I think that Go Tell the Mountain was written when he was starving. When it arrived in Paris, he was broke. Another Country is a different story. I think Another Country is written with an eye toward the cash register. Now, if you have read Go Tell the Mountain, John is Baldwin's alter ego in the novel. He gets the good lines, all the other guys are boogeymen, Gabriel, Frank, some of the others. And there's a line where he says, one day he'll have expensive clothes and eat great food. And that was Baldwin. He was like international star and, really was indulged by liberals until he was replaced by Eldridge Cleaver. That's how it works. We're interchangeable. So James Baldwin written two masterpieces by the time he's 44. By the time he's Ta-Nehisi Coates' age, he'd written, but Ta-Nehisi Coates, Bing Baldwin, and Eldridge Cleaver, one book, are all interchangeable. So I think that book, Another Country, was a formula for getting a crossover audience. So you have this white savior, Vivaldo. He saves Rufus, who's like a boogeyman, beats up people, and is really no good. And one of the most interesting characters, he's dead in the first 100 pages of the novel. So Vivaldo, and as a matter of fact, in some of the lines, Vivaldo treats him as a child, his child. You know what Rudyard Kipling said? Rudyard Kipling? He said the natives are half child, half devil. And so Vivaldo is the father of Rufus, and he rescues Leona, Rufus's sister. Yet he has disparaging remarks to make about the Italian and Irish American women in his background. That's like the Spielberg syndrome. I want Spielberg to do a Color Purple, Jewish Color Purple. But then if he does one, I read a magazine called The Tablet, and run by one of my former students. And there was a debate from a Jewish American woman who said that the Jewish producers in Hollywood give their roles to Gentile women, like Mariel Hemingway in one of Woody Allen's movies. It was actually supposed to be handed to a Jewish woman for actress for the role. So I said if they did do a Jewish Color Purple, would Nicole Kidman be the star? Or would one of Woody Allen's blonde Rhine maidens, be in there? Anyway, so these guys, they want to be, honorary black feminists or whatever, but they don't talk about the people in their background. So Vivaldo is a model for that. So I think also in Giovanni's Room. So some of the heroes are white male Americans who go around rescuing people. I think that was aimed toward the cash register. I saw this Peck movie. I didn't like it. Try as I might, I can't hate Doris Day. I'm sorry, you know. But I think what Peck did was to show those archives of Baldwin in debate, where, you know, he really makes a case, usually without the facts, about the black condition in the United States. Now, King and those people believe that he was imposed upon them as a leader from New York, from people in New York. And he gave words to people who were not articulate. So I remember when they tried to bring stop and frisk out here. You remember Bratton tried to bring that thing out here, stop and frisk? City Hall was packed, and both pro and con were quoting Baldwin. So I think that's his legacy. He was one of the early public intellectuals, and he did it brilliantly.
Hi, so we're in an art museum. Thank you so much for talking to us here. We've talked about your legacy in literature, in music, in the performing arts. I was wondering if we could talk a little bit about the visual arts. So I'm particularly interested in the work that you did around the Black arts movement and calling a spade, for example, and the disagreements that you had with some Black abstractionists in the 1960s. And I was wondering if you still feel the same way, if your views have changed or shifted. People like Richard Hunt or Raymond Saunders. Thank
I went
you.
to a black painter show in Brooklyn, which had black themes, and the best thing in there was Norman Rockwell's illustration of the marshals leading the little girl into school, because all the stuff was metal. And I think that's what happened in New York in the 1960s. You know, bankers and capitalists are very satisfied with abstract expressionism, because you can put it in your office, you know, it doesn't mean anything. And abstract expressionism was a reaction to social realism, which really was deeply political. You know, Diego Rivera. I mean, people say, well, you know, are you guys into politics? Well, Diego Rivera did great murals, which are political, and Rockefeller paid him back by putting a lot of his stuff in the mess hall in Dartmouth. You have to go there to see him. But he could paint, you know. These writers like Margaret Walker, who got the Yale Prize for poetry, For My People. I mean, it may be a political poem, but she could write. So I think that what happened in New York taught me that I could not build institutions in New York. The reaction to that article, I think it was 1969, in Arts Magazine. I did a profile of Joe Overstreet, the painter, and made an indictment of museums and called the museums racist. And black painters are upset because I didn't mention them. So what I saw was that there was a cutthroat competition to become the token, to be brought uptown. And that was the environment in New York. And it still goes on. As a matter of fact, I was tempted to I've been thinking for years writing a play about a black painter who gets a show in a museum and another black painter killing him, murdering him, so he could get it. So, I mean, that was a kind of cutthroat competition. So a lot of those people who just wanted to be accepted as universal, because I mentioned the term black, they became blacker than everybody. I mean, when a payroll showed up, when some money was in it, they became really black. But that taught me a lot, the reaction to that piece, and I'm glad you read it. That's an obscure piece, because I could not build the institutions in New York that I've done out here because of the individualism.
Any other one other question? I have one.
Yeah, sure.
Just we, in the early months of the Trump regime, are engaged in collective panic reading. Everyone, booksellers are selling out of their copies of 1984, and it can't happen here. And you mentioned that, the freelance pallbearers has been included on that list. But yet you read us a poem that you wrote, presumably very recently, and it reminds me of this kind of conflict and I'm looking for your advice here. Should we go back and read the old stuff, or should we be looking to artists like yourself and others to follow in what Toni Morrison suggested about, like, this is the time in which artists go to work? right, under adverse conditions like this in which, right, fascism threatens the United States, do we go back and read novels from the 30s, or do we look to people who are producing new stuff now?
I think fascism is new for whites, but you know, blacks have been on blacks have been on a police state since we've been here. Been on a police state, and we have also. I'm collaborating with Kathy Jackson, who's an economist, on a book about the trillions of dollars that blacks have. So the Marshall Plan is going the other way. If you live in a black neighborhood, you can see all the money going out. Police corruption. We get the police coming around asking for the drug dealers. Or, I go to meetings, crime council meetings, and the people want to know why the police and the drug dealers are so cozy. Well, it's obvious. So it's a Marshall Plan where, for example, the hotels where prostitution goes on, which is a big industry in Oakland, not owned by blacks. The liquor stores, not owned by blacks. The drug trade, that comes in from another community, down another, ethnic community. They bring the drugs in. And then you have the banks ripping blacks off. As a matter of fact, we have a very enlightened city attorney who's suing Wells Fargo because they give blacks subprime loans. Now, the mythology is that the banking crisis occurred because loans were given to people who couldn't afford them, and that's not true. Well, even the Wall Street Journal says that over 60% of those who got subprime loans were eligible for conventional loans. So if you take the trillions of dollars that so-called black captives contributed to the economy, the white people in the South were the richest white people in the world. Slavery was bigger than railroads, banking, all the other industries combined. And then you get into the Reconstruction, and the banks are still ripping off black Americans. So hundreds of billions of dollars of deposits made by blacks are used to finance white equity. Do you understand what I'm talking about? I'm still having problems. I write articles in the Times about criminal banks and how they rip off black people. And the name of the book is How to Survive Financially When the System is Rigged Against You. These other guys are not talking that. You look at these pundits on these shows, these black pundits, they're trying to preach a sermon to white Americans. We're trying to say that, blacks have to keep their assets as a matter of self-defense because they're constantly being ripped off. So there is a Marshall Plan, but it's going the other way in terms of corruption, in terms of vice, in terms of banks ripping off, in terms of, for example, the community, having to deal with redlining. Federal Housing Administration. Federal Housing Administration has been ripping off and redlining blacks for decades, okay? That's hundreds of millions of dollars. Blacks didn't get Social Security until the 50s. Whites got it in the 30s, 3% interest, free money. Free money in the 30s. That's when whites got Social Security. So they got hundreds of billions of dollars built up. Harry Truman's administration, when blacks, domestic workers and farmers got Social Security. So when they talk about blacks as takers, blacks are being taken. We're being taken. I'm having a problem right now. I mean, my credit rating is superb. I'm having a problem with a credit union. My financial advisor said, why don't you go to the credit union? I said, now I'm just Bank of America now because of some of the chicanery that they're indulging in. I might write a piece in the Times about that. I can talk back. That's one thing a writer can do. So I think that's the future. The other people can work on converting people. I don't think you can convert these Trump voters. I can't get anybody to tell me why white educated women voted for Trump. I wrote a piece about it in a magazine called Counterpunch. Can anybody answer that question? Because everybody said that Trump was so vulgar, I thought Bill Cosby was the only guy, Bill Cosby should have run for president. You know what I mean? He's so vulgar and so low down and such a thug that women in the suburbs and educated white women would not vote for him. They voted for him. So I sent an email because I'm writing an article about it. I can get published in Israel, no questions. But I sent an email to Mitch Jesuit and what's her name? No, not Amy Goodman. Ms. Jesuit. Who else? Oh yeah, Philip Madari, who does the Sunday show in Cape. I love KPF. But these guys all talking about all the white working class. They're so left behind, and making excuses for these anti-Semites and haters. They've been alienated, and they're having such a hard time, and why don't we coddle them? These people. And the haters are at the minimum. The haters among Trump's followers are at the minimum. I watched those rallies. I didn't see anybody at the minimum. I saw enthusiastic responses to his demagoguery. So that's the question that has to be answered. Why would white educated women choose race above gender?
I don't have. I don't have an answer.
I
know you're not asking me
Doesn't have an
directly,
answer.
but I don't have an answer. But with that though, like a profound, important question, right, about race, class, gender, politics in America. Let's just join in a round of applause for our speaker, for Mr. Ishmael Reed. Thank you so much for
I
coming.
have my book here.
There are a few copies of his book about Muhammad Ali who are on sale up here in the front, and thank you all for coming.